Imagine this. Your father has just passed away, and amid the grief, you're left to navigate something far more complicated: his estate. For one woman in New Jersey, that moment arrived in early 2022. Her father had passed in January, leaving behind a modest legacy, including the house she grew up in, a place filled with memories, family milestones, and quiet Sunday mornings that now existed only in her mind. That house wasn't just any property. It was her childhood home, half owned by her late father and half by her mother. According to the will, her mother would keep her share through a trust, but the daughter was entitled to 20% of her father's half. Not a fortune, but enough to feel like her father had left her something meaningful, a tangible connection to the life they once shared. And who was responsible for handling this delicate process? Her older sister, appointed as the executor of their father's will. On paper, it seemed simple enough: sell the house, distribute the proceeds fairly, and move on. But family and money rarely mix peacefully. Beneath the surface of polite emails and legal documents, something was already brewing. At first, everything appeared to be in order. The family's attorney explained that there was a waiting period, a mandatory 10 months before any funds could be released. It was the law in New Jersey, meant to give creditors time to step forward in case the deceased owed any debts. The daughter understood. She wasn't impatient. She trusted the process. For now, all she had to do was wait, trusting that her sister, the executor, would handle things honorably. But as she'd soon learn, even the most carefully written wills can become battlefields when trust starts to crumble. And this was only the beginning. For nearly a year, everything seemed quiet. The daughter did what most of us would do. She waited, trusting that her sister and the family's attorney were taking care of things behind the scenes. After all, this wasn't just about money. It was about doing things the right way, honoring her father's final wishes. Months passed. Then, one day, a letter arrived from the estate attorney. The message was straightforward. No creditors had come forward, no debts were found, and her portion of the inheritance was ready to be released. It felt like closure. One small, peaceful resolution in the middle of a painful chapter. The attorney even mentioned that the executor, her sister, wanted to expedite the process so everyone could move on. All she had to do was sign a release form, confirming that she accepted her share from the sale of the childhood home. She signed it immediately. 2 weeks later, a check appeared in her mailbox. The moment she held it, she felt both gratitude and relief, a small but powerful reminder that her father hadn't forgotten her. The money wasn't life-changing, but it was symbolic. It represented fairness, family, and the sense that maybe, just maybe, everything was finally behind her. For a moment, it felt like the story was over. The will had been respected. The house was gone, but its legacy, her share, was safely hers. But as she would soon discover, some stories don't end when the check clears. Sometimes they're just beginning. And this one was about to take a very strange turn. 2.5 years passed. Life moved on, or at least that's what she thought. But then, out of nowhere, the piece she'd finally found began to unravel. It started quietly. A short, formal notice arrived in her mailbox. Her sister, the executor, had fired the original estate attorney, the same attorney who had handled everything by the book, who had made sure all the paperwork was clean and compliant. No explanation, no warning, just gone. Soon after, the whispers started turning into numbers. Big ones. Her sister had hired a new lawyer and spent more than $75,000 in legal fees, all paid out of the estate's resources, the same estate their father had spent his life building. Then came the silence. Her sister stopped responding to emails. Calls went unanswered. The other beneficiaries, her siblings, were in the dark, too. The process of finalizing their father's will had completely stalled. The properties that were supposed to be distributed to her siblings still hadn't been transferred. What had once been a simple inheritance was turning into a financial fog. The executor's actions made no sense. Why drain the estate? Why dismiss the attorney who had done everything right? And then the most shocking twist came. The executor had dipped into the estate's remaining funds, including the proceeds from the sale of their childhood home, money that was supposed to have already been distributed fairly. The daughter had tried to stay out of the drama. She'd taken only what was legally hers, signed every document properly, and followed the law to the letter. But it didn't matter, because now her sister wasn't just mismanaging the estate. She was about to turn on her own family, and the next letter she received would change everything. One morning, she opened her mailbox and froze. Inside was a thick envelope from a law firm, her sister's new attorney. She tore it open, expecting maybe an update or a statement about the estate. But what she found made her blood run cold. The letter demanded that she return nearly half of the inheritance she had received 2.5 years earlier. The same inheritance that had been legally processed, approved, and paid out according to her father's will. The justification? Vague at best. Her sister, now acting as both executor and accuser, claimed that estate funds had been misallocated and needed to be recovered. To make it worse, the attorney had already filed a civil action, meaning she wasn't just being asked to give the money back voluntarily, she was being sued. The confusion turned to disbelief. How could this happen? The waiting period had passed. There were no creditors. The funds were cleared and lawfully distributed. She wasn't even a beneficiary of the other properties still tied up in legal limbo. Those belonged to her siblings. So why was she being targeted? It felt like betrayal disguised as bureaucracy. Her sister had gone from executor to enforcer, dragging her into a mess she didn't create. The same sister who once expedited her payment was now accusing her of taking money she wasn't entitled to. But she hadn't done anything wrong. She had followed every step, trusted every instruction, and signed every document required by law. This wasn't about legalities anymore. It was about power, control, and perhaps something even darker. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just a family dispute. It was a full-blown legal war, and her own sister was leading the charge against her. And the fight for her father's legacy had only just begun. As the legal dust started to rise, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about control. Her sister, now fully entrenched as executor, was treating the estate like her personal chessboard, and every sibling had become a pawn. The estate, once filled with memories and value, was quickly turning into a financial black hole. Legal bills piled up, over $75,000 and counting, all paid from their father's hard-earned assets. Properties remained in limbo. Documents went missing. And transparency, gone. Her sister wasn't answering calls or emails, not just from her, but from everyone. The beneficiaries had been completely cut off, left to wonder where the money went and why nothing had been finalized. What made it worse was the blatant irony. The executor's actions had drained the estate's resources, including dipping into proceeds from the sale of their childhood home, the same funds that had covered her rightful inheritance. And now, in some twisted logic, her sister's lawyer was arguing that she had to pay back part of her inheritance, as if the executor's mismanagement was somehow her fault. It felt like being punished for following the rules. But here's what most people don't realize. Once an executor crosses that line, the system isn't automatically on your side. Probate law is complex, slow, and, at times, emotionally brutal. Unless you fight back with evidence and persistence, even the most unreasonable demands can spiral into years of legal limbo. And that's exactly where she found herself. Trapped in a system where family ties meant nothing, and every day brought another bill, another accusation, another layer of confusion. The executor had turned the family legacy into a battleground, but she wasn't going to back down, Not after everything her father had worked for. Not after seeing his final wishes twisted beyond recognition. And soon she'd learn something powerful, that the law wasn't entirely on her sister's side after all. When she finally met with her own attorney, the truth began to surface, and it changed everything. Her father's original lawyer had handled things exactly by the book. He'd ensured the estate waited the legally required period, 9 to 10 months, to give any unknown creditors time to come forward. None ever did. After that, all beneficiaries were cleared to receive their disbursements. Everything had been signed, witnessed, and filed properly. In other words, her payout was fully legitimate. The chaos didn't start until her sister took matters into her own hands, firing the attorney, spending down estate funds, and dragging everyone through a maze of unnecessary litigation. That was where things went off the rails. Her new lawyer didn't mince words. You are not responsible for the executor's mismanagement or her legal bills. Period. He explained that in New Jersey, executors have a fiduciary duty, a legal obligation to act in the best interest of all beneficiaries and preserve the estate's assets. By exhausting resources, stalling property transfers, and trying to claw back already distributed funds, her sister had done the exact opposite. In fact, the lawyer warned that this could be viewed as breach of fiduciary duty, a serious accusation that could result in her sister being removed as executor. And then came the most surprising part. Her lawyer hinted that she might have grounds to file her own petition in probate court, not just to defend herself, but to strip her sister of her executor role entirely. After months of silence, manipulation, and legal bullying, that single moment felt like a breath of justice. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a lost battle. Because when it came to her father's legacy and the truth, she was finally ready to fight back. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't scared. She was angry, and that anger fueled her clarity. Her attorney helped her gather every document: the letters from the original estate lawyer, the release forms she had signed, the proof of distribution, the bank records showing when and how her Shar-E had been deposited. Every piece of paper told the same story. She had followed the law, and her sister had not. Meanwhile, her sister's actions grew more erratic. She refused to communicate with the beneficiaries, ignored deadlines, and continued to burn through what was left of the estate's money. The properties that were supposed to be transferred to their siblings were still sitting idle, draining taxes and fees each month. It was clear the executor's mismanagement wasn't just unprofessional, it was endangering the estate itself. That's when her lawyer filed a formal motion in probate court, a petition to remove the executor for cause. The filing outlined everything: failure to distribute assets, depletion of estate funds, and attempts to reclaim money already lawfully disbursed. It was all backed by evidence, timelines, and legal precedent. When the notice reached her sister, the power dynamic shifted instantly. For months, she'd been the one issuing threats, dictating terms, and hiding behind lawyers. But now, she was the one under legal scrutiny, and facing the very court that could strip her authority entirely. Suddenly, the woman who once acted untouchable had to defend her every move in front of a judge. And as the court date approached, it became obvious. The tide was turning. The story was no longer about a sister accused of taking too much. It was about an executor who had taken too far. For the first time, justice felt close. But what happened in that courtroom would determine everything, not just her inheritance, but the truth about her father's final wishes. And when the judge spoke, the entire family would finally hear whose side the law was truly on. When the day finally came, the courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, filled with years of family tension, broken trust, and unspoken grief. Her sister sat across the aisle, her lawyer whispering frantically, papers scattered across the table. For the first time, the executor looked uneasy. Gone was the confidence she once wielded like a weapon. The judge reviewed the evidence, the original attorney's correspondence, the clear timeline of the estate, the verified disbursement, and the subsequent misuse of funds. It didn't take long for the picture to form. Then came the ruling. The judge stated plainly, the inheritance she received was lawful and final. The executor had no right to demand its return. What's more, her sister's reckless management had violated her fiduciary duty. The court ordered her immediate removal as executor, pending a review of how estate funds had been used and potentially misused. For the first time in years, justice felt real. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply exhaled. A deep, trembling breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since her father passed. But this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about restoring dignity to her father's legacy, the same legacy that had been dragged through legal chaos and family betrayal. She knew there were still hurdles ahead, audits, property transfers, new filings, but the battle had shifted. The truth had spoken louder than manipulation. And as she left the courthouse that day, sunlight cutting through the clouds, she thought about her father's voice, steady, practical, and fair. He'd always said, "Do the right thing, even when no one's watching." Now the world had watched, and the right thing had finally been done. But beneath the relief was one haunting thought. If greed could tear apart her family this easily, how many others had faced the same? In the end, this wasn't just a legal victory. It was a warning that the real battle over an inheritance isn't fought over money, but over integrity.